Well, for a closer look at Norway's economy, I'm joined by Saruhan Hatipoglu, CEO of BERI and our global economics analyst. Welcome back to the show.
Pleasure to be here.
So what was your reaction to the meeting between President Trump and Prime Minister Solberg?
Well, that was great. A lot of my clients, though, were surprised. They said, why Norway? Why are they meeting this early in the year? But the foundations, Rachelle, were lit last year when the foreign minister visited in March, and the focus was Russia. Because, as you know, Norway has territory in the Barents Sea, and they engage in activities, spy activities. I'm not going to be diplomatic about it. And that's a very good common point with the U.S. They talked about free trade, they talked about environment, but Russia was the main issue. And 2 months after that, let's remember, they extended the U.S. Marines staying in Norway until the end of this year, something that the Russians didn't like very much. So I think the meeting today focused on that, even though we didn't hear it explicitly from either leader.
Now let's look at Norway itself. What are the main drivers between the health of Norway's economy, and how sustainable are they?
Well, it's good because they are focusing on sales of oil and gas. That's about 50% of their total export. But the country itself has found a way to use that, to channel that in the most efficient way, because we have oil money in Russia, Saudi Arabia, Venezuela, we had it. But all of these countries caught what we call the Dutch disease, in that they focused on that export industry and neglected everything else. Norway didn't do that. They actually invested the money. And they actually went through this Dutch disease process, Rachelle, but for 4 years. And then the government said, look, we're going to actually limit the amount of oil money coming to the economy. They created a buffer fund, the sovereign wealth fund, and then they invested the money that was in there, which was very smart.
Certainly, I'm sure a lot of oil-producing countries wish they'd taken a more divergent path. Now, let's also look at the economy and its reliance on global trade. How prepared do you think it might be for perhaps a global shock in the economy?
Norway, that is, right?
Yes.
Well, they are ready because they have focused on a lot of other things, like I said, other than oil itself. They have used that money to improve technological innovation in the country. They have looked at employment, they have looked at education, they have looked at closing the gender gap, and all of these things have created an environment where we're looking at the gender gap, for example. Ratio of women to men in the country in the job market is 0.95. The ratio of earning income, the women and men, is 0.79. That is a pretty good number. Education, they have invested immensely. In the press conference we heard today about the technology part, even President Trump said 98%, he didn't say 98%, but a lot of the energy, 98%, is derived from renewables, hydropower that they use. So all of these things have created an environment where they're not really going to be affected by trade issues or temporary oil shocks.
And it's funny that the Norwegian people obviously seem very happy. The United Nations World Happiness Report actually lists Norway as the happiest country. They also tend to rank highly when it comes to wages, ease of doing business, and supporting entrepreneurs. What are they getting right?
When I was going to college, one of my housemates was Norwegian, and he showed me where they lived. I looked at that picture, and I understand why it's the happiest place. The mountains, the blue, the green, everything. But yeah, I mean, look at that index. That index doesn't only look at income generation. It looks at 6 socioeconomic indicators, and all of these are really high up in Norway. If we just look at the income growth, I mean, the U.S. here has, 8 years of growth, but it has slipped to 14th in the happiness index. So they're doing something right.
So I also want to look at this idea of the women in leadership roles in Norway. What kind of structure do they have to put in place in order to build that?
They have done an awesome job. Going back to 2003, if I'm not mistaken, they introduced a law saying that there's a minimum 40% of publicly traded company corporate boards will be women. And there was actually a lot of opposition in Norway to that. And they gave, I think, 2 years to do that. And companies were able to do it, but the argument was, well, that violates supply and demand. And the other argument was, we don't have that many women in the country to put 40% to corporate boards. So they changed the definition, Rachelle, because the initial idea was women with corporate leadership experience, but they changed that to women that have experience in the fields of finance, technology, education, health. And now we're looking at the publicly traded companies as well as private companies in Norway. We have a lot of women representation.
Well, certainly a lot of lessons that can be learned for a lot of countries. Thank you so much, as always, Saruhan Hatipoglu, BERI CEO and CGTN's Global Economics Analyst.